It's art time. Medic! Okay, so this here fantastic piece of Rogue Trader era artwork features what were collectively known as medics back in the Rogue Trader era. Some would say the best era of Warhammer 40,000. Well, second best after 2nd edition. But 5th edition still had the best rules. Now this picture is interesting in that it actually shows us a mix of the Imperial factions of the time. We are looking at an alliance. I know it's just to show off the various medics, but it's also a nice piece of art. We have the Marines taking centre stage, and of course the Imperial Army as they were known then, and also everyone's favourite, the Squats. Lovely. In the picture are 2 different Space Marine chapters. There's the pair of Crimson Fists, with one being dragged by the other, and then there's the Space Wolf Medic, standing proud front and centre. I always liked the original Space Wolves chapter symbol, the yellow head with the red outline. I think it looks cool. Also in the picture is the Imperial Army Medic. Now see that little disc on his chest? That used to mean something. I believe this one means he's in the 22nd squad of the 2nd company, a 22 over a disc split into 2. If the disc was one colour, it would be the 1st company, and if it was quartered, it would be 4th, and so on, I think. A clever way to symbolise the number, in my opinion. As is par the course for Rogue Trader era 40k artwork, the Imperium here is battling against the Orcs. The Orcs were the most common enemy in Warhammer 40,000 battles back in the day. Sadly, they seem to have taken more of a back seat these days, with maybe Chaos being more of the main enemy? Who would you say it was? After staring at this piece for a while, I do have to say I really like that old Crimson Fists scheme, especially on the beaky Marines. Has anyone painted their new Mark 6 Marines as Crimson Fists? If so, I feel I need to see them. Now I myself have some of the old RTB01 Space Marines to paint up one day, and I think it would probably be fitting to paint them as Crimson Fists. That would be nicely era appropriate, as it were. Do you think that's a good idea? Or do you think it's a little predictable? Maybe we should do the old Mentor Legion, they were pretty cool. So it would appear it's someone's birthday. Break out the silly string. Are they still allowed to sell that stuff? I'm sure it was banned when I was a lad. It went everywhere. Really good fun though. What even was it? Now this stuff, whatever it is a weird sticky looking substance that appears to have covered our poor victim here head to toe. It's gone everywhere, and in the words of Kristen Wiig in that Ghostbusters movie, it went in every crevice. Or was it orifice? Now to me it looks like our poor victim is checking his watch. He has the same pose as Marty McFly on the Back to the Future posters. I guess you could say he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't actually see a watch anywhere on his arm though. In amongst all that white sticky slop is a man. Well, I think it's a man, and his attire to me suggests he's an Imperial Army officer. He's not wearing a helmet, but a peaked cap. Are these known as forage caps? What is the difference between a forage cap and a normal cap? I bet one of you watching knows. Now I have a feeling what we are seeing here is the results of a Tanglefoot grenade. One of the myriad of grenade types that used to be a thing. There were loads. Things like anti-plant and vortex grenades. Remember those? Are they still in the game somewhere? If not, they should be. You know, I think this guy is actually wearing some washing up gloves, known as marigold gloves here in the UK. Do you call them marigolds in the rest of the world, or is it just here? I have a pair myself that I use when I'm stripping paint. My tip is always to buy a pair bigger than you think you need, as they always seem to be quite tight. Now I've just realised this picture reminds me a lot of Shelob's Lair from the Lord of the Rings films. It was in the third one, I believe. A cave full of sticky spider webs. It's sticky! It was either that or silly string. The orcs might have been having a party. If there's one thing I enjoy about Rogue Trader, it's some of the weird and wonderful robot designs, and this one is no different. Get a load of this guy. Fantastic. To me, this robot looks a bit like those Dark Trooper things we see in the old Star Wars games. They've recently made an appearance in The Mandalorian too, and I think they're the same things. Basically, black robotic stormtroopers with jetpacks. If I'm getting muddled up, I'm sure someone will be along shortly to put me on the straight and narrow. Now regarding The Mandalorian, I did enjoy the first couple of seasons, although I felt it made the Star Wars universe feel a bit smaller. Everything being so interconnected makes the galaxy feel small. It would be nice to see things that have little to no effect in the grand scheme of things, their own little stories. The Mandalorian seemed to start like this, and although I did like all the Luke Skywalker stuff, I just felt the world had shrunk, you know? But that's just my opinion. Now interestingly, our robot here has a ball and chain weapon. It doesn't actually appear to be attached to his hand though, so he might have picked it up rather than being equipped with it out of the factory. I'm intrigued to hear what you guys think about that. Maybe he ripped it off something else. Does anyone use ball and chain weapons in 40k? Also, on the robot's shoulders are some interesting looking details. From the side view we can see one of them is actually some sort of rifle. But what are the others? Are they even some type of weapons? I suppose they could be missile launcher tubes. Okay, so bear with me here. At first I thought the robot's knee pads looked like the old ring pop sweets you used to be able to buy in the mid-90s. I think Americans refer to them as candy. Anyway, I realised it's not ring pops I was thinking about, but dummy pops. Do you remember the candy dummies? I'm sure I remember them coming with massive strings or tassels to tie them around your neck. Now, ring pops were an offshoot of the old push pop sweets. Remember those things? Don't push me, push a push pop. I think that was how it went, something like that. They looked a bit like a tube and you'd push your finger in and it would push the pop out of the top of the tube. Bloody awful things. I remember the spit and the saliva would come down the inside of the tube and get all over your finger and you'd end up with sticky fingers. It was bloody awful. But they were a big deal back in the days, probably like 1993, something like that. Maybe a bit earlier, 92, or maybe a little later, 94. If you know when push pops came out, let us all know in the comments below. There's probably someone out there with a push pop collection, isn't there? As is typical for early 40k art, we now have a very dreary and grim scene, a lot more sombre and dark in tone compared to the later art of 2nd edition. So what we're looking at here is a Space Marine and some grisly trophies. Orc heads on spikes. My question is, did the Space Marine do this? Are they his trophies? Or has he discovered them? The Marine wandering about appears to hail from the Blood Drinkers chapter. You saw these guys quite a lot in the Rogue Trader era, and sadly not so much these days. I was always a big fan of the Blood Drinkers for some reason. I thought their logo was really cool. I might have to go as far to say I prefer the Blood Drinkers to the Blood Angels. Now usually when we see Space Marines in the art, they are equipped with bolters. But today things are a little different. This Marine has one of those weird disintegrator guns. I believe only the C-100 Marines and the LE-2 Marine had this. I'm hoping one day they make a return to the game somehow. As I mentioned before, I believe these heads on the sticks or poles belong to orcs. I don't think these are human faces. They even have the same sort of orc armour as would be fitting for the period. Although a little on the macabre side, these would actually be pretty easy to make from things out of your bits box. Just some orc heads and maybe some cocktail sticks, or even tree branches. Now originally I thought those poles in the background were banner poles, but on closer inspection I realised they're not, are they? It's more gruesome than that. They are crucified bodies. I would assume orcs again, as the rest of the body parts are orcs. Very grim. You don't see so much of this sort of art these days, do you? Now, do you remember way back in the 90s when Arachnophobia came out? It was a big deal. It was supposed to be a scary movie. I don't remember it really being scary though. More action-based perhaps? Although I've not seen it in a long time. I do remember liking it though. What did you think of it? Have you even seen it? Now, when I was a lad growing up, hell, even nowadays, it seems that everyone is scared of spiders. Why is this? What makes spiders so frightening? I once heard a tale. It's because they're actually an alien species not of this earth, and that's why we are so repulsed by them. I reckon that was some school ground mumbo jumbo though, though it does make a bit of sense. This monster is quite interesting, what with it being a spider in Warhammer 40,000. I can't say I remember any other spiders. We usually only see them in Warhammer Fantasy or Age of Sigmar. I suppose the closest thing we get are the Necron scarabs, or maybe even those weird old tyrannid squig things that used to come in swarms. Did they have names? Now, being a Warhammer 40,000 beast, I fully expect this monster to have an interesting clever name, like an Arachnodoody or Silkweaver or something. But it's not. It's literally just called a giant spider. A placeholder name. Maybe they forgot to revisit that one. This spider, again, reminds me a lot of the giant spider from the third Lord of the Rings movie, Shelob. She always loves to feed, or whatever the line was. But then again, all giant spiders look rather similar, like a spider that's giant. Remember the giant spiders in Harry Potter? I think they looked a bit like this too, and it's been a while since I saw that. I'm not sure if any of you are interested, but here at SnakeWorks we actually have a pet tarantula. She's still a baby, and her name is Debbie. Now, the reason the tarantula is called Debbie is because Debbie is a Arizona desert blonde. And from blonde we go to Blondie, and with Blondie we have Debbie Harry. So Debbie. If it turns out to be male, then we could call it Harry instead, I suppose. One day I'll get her on the channel, but she's still a little baby. At first glance, this picture might look a little like a scribbled mess, but it's not. It's actually a wonderful piece of artwork. A piece in the typical 1980s dynamic style. What we're looking at here is a war scene, or perhaps the aftermath of said war. It would appear what we're seeing is the orcs' position of the battle. There's an orc or two hanging about with the Gretchen. The Gretchen that look like goblins from Labyrinth. There's also an orc slumped over a big piece of what I assume is machinery. He's either having a nap or dead. I would assume dead, as it doesn't look the most comfortable sleeping position. When Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader was released, the first orc boxed set, RTBO2, followed swiftly after. It might have even been released on the same day. Anyway, the orcs in that set have the same armour and attire on as the orcs in this piece, and I do like the look of that era of orc. Although the picture does look a bit of a mess, and some might like to use the term dynamic, we can see a lot of detail in between our characters. There are a lot of sort of tree-like structures that might actually just be broken metal girders or the ruins of a city. Maybe even the artist didn't know exactly what they were. Some parts look organic, and then in other parts they look more mechanical. Maybe it's the old biomechanical Giga influence worming its way in again. For some reason, all the stuff in the background of this picture, and I think the term I'm looking for is busyness, reminds me of the look of the Machine City from The Matrix 3. I remember a lot of people didn't like the second and third Matrix movies when they came out, but I myself really enjoyed them. I think they were quite good. 100 times better than the fourth one that came out recently. Have you seen that? It's bloody awful. On the left hand side of the picture, there's what I think is a large mounted weapon of sorts. I don't know exactly what sort of weapon it is, but to me it looks like a heavy stubber. Probably because of the upturned magazine and the flared barrel. There's also a ball-shaped part behind the flared tip that looks a little odd. Another Rogue Trader art video usually means another weird alien plant, and this one does not disappoint. I really like this one. A little more interesting than the mushrooms we've seen previously. So, although this is actually a plant, it almost looks like it could be a creature. Well, maybe some sort of weird undersea beast. There are a lot of strange things that live in the ocean. It reminds me a bit of one of those feather or basket stars. I believe they are called crinoids. Have you seen those? Very odd indeed. Now, whatever this strange entity is, I get the feeling that if it were real, I would not want to go anywhere near the thing. I've seen far too many sci-fi films with tentacles and appendages, and nobody wants to get grabbed and dragged in and be prodded in some horrid manner. The shape of this plant monster is interesting. It has the sort of general shape of a tree. It has a trunk with some branches of sorts growing out of the top, but the lower portion reminds me of a squid or something. Something horrible, something I would not like to rub up against. If this was the 90s, we would say it's rank. At the end of the day, you would be right to be fearful of this plant, because the description says the tentacles drag you in, where you then die and slowly rot away, in turn feeding the plant with your essence. Lovely. Now, I have a feeling you would probably smell that thing long before you saw it. It would stink. A bit like the world's smelliest plant, some big horrible thing that I think they find in the Amazonian rainforests from time to time. It looks a bit like a big melted paddling pool, and apparently it smells like dead bodies. Or cadavers, I think is the word for it. Or is it just corpse? What's the difference between a corpse and a cadaver? Anyway, I bet it's pretty interesting. And speaking of interesting, if you are enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Harry. And remember, Mrs. SnakeWorks has said that when we hit 10,000 subscribers, we're allowed to order a Warhound Titan. So please smash that subscribe button and we can hit that target ASAP. If you are enjoying the content on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below or up here somewhere. Or you could even become a channel member, which is all the rage these days. Again, there's links to that in the description below. Anyway, that's enough e-begging. Let's continue on. So looking at this piece of art, you have to ask yourself, is this even Warhammer 40,000? Well, the answer is yes. It's very early 40k. So early, it was one of the first pieces of art for the game. We've moved on a fair bit since these days, haven't we? You won't be seeing car garages in 40k these days, I can tell you. Now this place looks a little bit like where my parents take their cars to for MOTs and things. There's always that family friend who owns a garage and does these jobs cheap, but seem to take forever to do. I swear it takes them about a week to change a tyre, but they justify it by saying it was cheap. It's okay, as long as you don't need your car, I suppose. The chap smoking the fag in the middle of the picture reminds me of a certain Mr. Rennick I used to work with. He was what you would call a brown nose. We actually called him brown tongue, he was that bad. He was pretty much universally disliked, as any teeny tiny little thing that happened was usually reported to the management before it had even finished happening. A 10 out of 10 scumbag. The man also appears to be wearing a t-shirt with that A logo on again. I think we spot this logo in every single art video we've done, so there must be some sort of significance to it. If you have any theories, then please feel free to share them with us. The cars in the background look quite normal, similar to the cars we see around today, albeit with a few extras, like weird pipes coming out of the bonnet, or hood for you Americans. Also, the car on the left looks a lot like a Volkswagen Beetle to me. I used to love those as a kid, and I still have a soft spot for them now, to be fair. The language used on the banners and signs is not English. Is it based on any other language at all? It reminds me a bit of Aurebesh or whatever it's called that they use in Star Wars. One of the words looks like it says Saub or something, and the other is Ubto. Which sort of car would you rather have? A Saub or an Ubto? If you want to see some more Oldhammer art videos, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.